The silver hull of Marcus Jones's ship gleamed under the twin suns of Nexus as it descended toward the spaceport. Through the viewport, Marcus observed the sprawling marketplace that had earned this frontier planet its reputation. Legal commerce occupied the central districts, but it was the shadows between buildings that drew traders like him from across the galaxy. Marcus adjusted his worn leather jacket and checked the blaster at his hip. At 35, his face carried the weathered look of someone who had seen too much of the universe's darker corners. His dark hair was cut short, a remnant of his military days, and a scar ran along his jawline, a souvenir from a deal gone wrong 3 years ago. "Docking complete, Captain," announced the ship's computer. "Run standard security protocols, dash." "I should be back before nightfall," Marcus said, grabbing a bag of tradable items and credits. The spaceport bustled with activity. Merchants called out to passing travelers, advertising wares from 100 worlds. Marcus moved with purpose, nodding to familiar faces but never stopping. He wasn't here for the legal goods. 2 hours later, after navigating a maze of increasingly narrow alleys, Marcus arrived at a nondescript door guarded by a hulking 4-armed alien. "Business," the guard rumbled. "Engine parts. Class 7 warp coils, specifically," Marcus replied, slipping a credit chip into one of the guard's lower hands. The door slid open, revealing the true black market of Nexus. Here, items banned throughout civilized space were bought and sold freely. Weapons, drugs, forbidden technology, and sometimes worse things. Marcus moved through the crowded hall, eyes scanning the merchandise. He needed those warp coils if he wanted to reach the outer systems, but none of the vendors seemed to have what he was looking for. "You look lost," said a thin man with cybernetic eye implants. "First time." "Looking for Class 7 warp coils," Marcus replied, keeping his voice neutral. The man grinned, revealing metal teeth. "None here today, but I have something better. New shipment, just arrived. Special clients only." Something in the man's tone raised Marcus's suspicions, but the prospect of rare technology was too tempting to ignore. He followed the thin man through a hidden door and down a dimly lit corridor. The passage opened into a circular room where a small crowd had gathered. At first, Marcus thought they were auctioning rare artifacts. Then he saw the containment fields. Inside each shimmering barrier stood a living being. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "The real market," the thin man whispered. "Rare specimens from across the galaxy. Some for labor, some for entertainment, others for collection." Marcus felt sick. In his years on the fringe, he had heard rumors of such markets, but had never seen one. His hand instinctively moved toward his blaster, but he forced it back down. One man against this operation would accomplish nothing. That's when he saw her. In a containment field at the far end stood a woman unlike any Marcus had ever seen. Her skin glowed with a faint blue luminescence, and patterns of light seemed to pulse beneath it like flowing water. Her eyes, entirely silver without pupil or iris, surveyed the room with unmistakable intelligence and, despite her situation, dignity. "Magnificent, isn't she?" the thin man said, following Marcus's gaze. "Last auction today. An Asteri female, possibly one of the last of her kind. The collectors are very excited." Marcus watched as the woman's silver eyes met his. No pleading, no fear, just a quiet assessment. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that transcended species. "How much?" Marcus asked. The thin man laughed. "More than you have, Spacer. The bidding starts at 50,000 credits." Marcus's mind raced. He had come for engine parts that found something that awakened the humanity he thought he'd lost during his years in the void. In that moment, he made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. "We'll see about that," he said quietly, joining the gathering of bidders. Marcus scanned the room, counting 12 bidders, mostly wealthy collectors with security personnel nearby. The auctioneer, a reptilian alien with prismatic scales, took position beside the Asteri woman's containment field. Bidding begins at 50,000 credits for this exceptional Asteri specimen, the auctioneer announced. A true collector's treasure from a civilization now lost to the stars. A tall man in expensive clothes raised a finger. 50,000. Another bidder called. 60,000. Marcus needed a distraction. His hand slipped into his pocket, fingers wrapping around a small device he'd acquired for emergencies. A localized EMP disruptor, illegal on most planets, but effective. 75,000, called the third bidder. Marcus raised his hand. 100,000. The room quieted as heads turned toward him. The auctioneer's eyes narrowed. The gentleman in the leather jacket offers 100,000. Do I hear 110? While attention focused on him, Marcus subtly pressed a button on the device. 5 seconds until activation. 110, said the first bidder. 150, Marcus countered, moving closer to the containment field controls. 4 seconds. 200,000, said a new voice, a woman wearing jewels that could buy a small spaceship. 3 seconds. 250, Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. 2 seconds. The auctioneer smiled. 250,000 from our enthusiastic new bidder. Going once. 1 second. Going twice. The EMP activated with a barely audible pulse. Immediately, the lights flickered and the containment field surrounding the captives shimmered and failed. Shouts of alarm filled the room as the emergency lights switched on, bathing everything in dim red. Security breach. Someone yelled. Marcus moved quickly through the confusion. He reached the Asteri woman, who had already stepped from her disabled prison. This way, he whispered, but she was already moving toward the other captives, helping them to their feet. We must free them all, she said, her voice musical and determined. Marcus knew they had perhaps 60 seconds before security protocols would restore power. He made a split-second decision and ran to the central control panel, using his military knowledge to override the emergency lockdown. All the containment fields shut down completely. Everyone out, he shouted to the disoriented captives. Run. Chaos erupted as captives scattered. Security personnel tried to contain the situation, and angry bidders shouted orders. The Asteri woman remained at Marcus's side, her silver eyes alert. Follow me, Marcus said, drawing his blaster. My ship is in the main port. They ran through the corridor, alarm sirens blaring behind them. The market was in full panic as they emerged, with security forces converging from all directions. Stop them, the thin man with cybernetic eyes shouted, pointing at Marcus and the Asteri woman. A security guard fired, the energy bolt missing Marcus's head by inches. He returned fire, hitting a power junction that exploded in a shower of sparks, buying them precious seconds. They sprinted through the crowded market, dodging between startled shoppers and overturned stalls. The Asteri woman moved with surprising grace, keeping pace despite her recent captivity. There, Marcus pointed to a service exit that would lead to the spaceport. 3 market enforcers appeared, blocking their path. Before Marcus could raise his weapon, the Asteri woman stepped forward, making a fluid gesture with her hand. The air around the enforcers shimmered, and they froze in place, expressions confused. How did you? Marcus began. Later, she interrupted. Your ship. They burst into the spaceport as alarms began ringing across the facility. In the distance, Marcus could see the familiar shape of his ship, the Wanderer. Dash, emergency startup protocol. He shouted into his communicator as they ran across the landing field. The ship's engines hummed to life, the boarding ramp lowering as they approached. Behind them, market security vehicles screeched into the spaceport. Inside, Marcus urged, firing covering shots as the Asteri woman sprinted up the ramp. Energy bolts struck the ship's hull as Marcus followed her inside. Dash, seal the ship and get us out of here. The ramp closed, and the Wanderer lifted off with a roar, accelerating toward the safety of open space. The Wanderer shuddered as it entered hyperspace, leaving the pursuit ships far behind. Marcus leaned against the control panel, exhaling heavily as the blue swirl of faster-than-light travel replaced the stars on the view screen. "We're clear," he said, turning to the Asteri woman who stood motionless in the center of the cockpit. "At least for now." She nodded, her luminescent skin casting gentle blue shadows across the ship's interior. "You took a great risk for a stranger." Marcus shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable with his impulsive action. Nobody deserves to be sold like cargo. Yet many would simply look away. Her silver eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. "I am Lyra. At least, that is the closest pronunciation your language can manage." "Marcus Jones," he replied, gesturing to a seat. "You should rest. You're safe now." Lyra moved with fluid grace to the offered chair. "Safety is a relative concept in this galaxy, Marcus Jones." For the first time, Marcus noticed intricate patterns beneath her skin, constellations of light that shifted subtly as she moved. He had heard stories of the Asteri, but most considered them legends rather than a real species. "I thought the Asteri were—" He hesitated. "Extinct." Lyra finished for him. "Nearly so. My world fell to the Krell Empire 20 cycles ago. Those who survived the initial attack were hunted for our biological uniqueness and knowledge." Marcus activated the ship's autopilot and turned his chair to face her. "What kind of knowledge?" Lyra raised her hand, and tiny points of light gathered above her palm, forming a miniature three-dimensional star map. "My people were travelers and scholars for 100,000 years before your species discovered fire. We mapped the corridors between dimensions, learned to harness energy from the spaces between stars, and studied the consciousness of the universe itself." Marcus stared in amazement as the map expanded, showing star systems he had never seen on any chart. "This is how you stop those guards at the market," he said. "Some kind of technology." Lyra closed her hand, and the display vanished. "Not technology as you understand it. We evolved alongside our science until the distinction became meaningless. What you call magic, we call knowledge. And that's why they want you. For this knowledge." "Yes, the Krell stripped our libraries and laboratories, but they could not access the wisdom passed from generation to generation within our genetic memory." Lyra's expression darkened. "Those they captured were dissected, studied, enslaved for their abilities. Few remain now." Marcus felt a chill at her words. He had rescued her on impulse, but now realized he had potentially made himself an enemy of powerful forces. "Are there others of your kind still free?" he asked. "Perhaps. There were colonies beyond our home system, but communication ended after the invasion." Lyra stood suddenly and approached him. "Marcus Jones, by the ancient customs of my people, I owe you a life debt. My knowledge, abilities, and loyalty are yours until the debt is repaid." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "That's not necessary. I didn't help you to gain a servant." "Not a servant," Lyra corrected, her voice firm. "An ally bound by honor. My people do not take such bonds lightly." Before Marcus could protest further, the ship's alarm sounded. Dash's automated voice announced, "Tracking device detected. External hull, rear quadrant." "They must have tagged us during the escape," Marcus said, checking the scanner. "We need to remove it before dropping out of hyperspace." Lyra placed her hand on the control panel. Light flowed from her fingers into the ship's systems. "I can help with that," she said as displays around the cockpit flared with new information. "Your vessel is more capable than you realize." Marcus watched in astonishment as his ship's systems responded to her touch. Whatever he had expected when he entered that auction room, this alliance with perhaps the last scholar of an ancient species wasn't it. "Tell me what to do," he said simply. Lyra's silver eyes met his. "First, we survive. Then, if you are willing, we search for my people. There is much the galaxy has forgotten that it should remember." 3 weeks after their escape from Nexus, the Wanderer drifted in orbit around a gas giant in the outer rim. Marcus worked beneath the main console, repairing damage from their last encounter with bounty hunters. "Hand me the flux calibrator," he said, extending his hand. Instead of the tool touching his palm, he felt Lyra's cool fingers as she pressed the calibrator into his hand. Her touch lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Thanks," Marcus mumbled, focusing intently on the wiring. Living with an alien who considered herself bound to him by honor had proven complicated. Lyra insisted on preparing his meals, anticipating his needs, and keeping watch while he slept. Her constant attention made Marcus increasingly uncomfortable. "You're troubled," Lyra observed, kneeling beside him. The blue light from her skin illuminated the dark space under the console. "Just concentrating," he replied. "Your biorhythms suggest otherwise." She tilted her head. "Have I failed in my duties?" Marcus sighed and slid out from under the console. "That's exactly it, Lyra. I don't want you to have duties to me. Where I come from, people don't owe life debts." Lyra's luminescence dimmed slightly. "You reject my bond." "I reject the idea that you need to serve me. You're free now. You don't owe me anything." Lyra stood, her silver eyes unreadable. "Among my people, bonds are not burdens but sacred connections. I honor you not from obligation, but from—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Gratitude." Before Marcus could respond, the ship's sensors blared. Dash's voice announced, "Multiple vessels approaching, matching signatures to known bounty hunter craft." Marcus jumped to his feet. "How did they find us?" He rushed to the cockpit, Lyra following closely behind. The scanner showed 3 ships moving to surround them. "We need to jump," Marcus said, initiating the hyperspace drive. Nothing happened. "Dash, what's wrong with the drive?" "Hyperspace inhibitor field detected. The Wanderer cannot break orbit." Marcus swore under his breath. "They've trapped us." He turned to weapons control, but knew the Wanderer was outgunned against 3 hunter ships. "Marcus," Lyra said quietly, "I can help, but you must trust me." Their eyes met across the cockpit. During their weeks together, Marcus had seen glimpses of Lyra's abilities, healing minor injuries, interfacing with the ship's systems, sensing dangers before they appeared. But she had always held something back. "What do you need?" he asked. "Your permission. The connection goes both ways." Marcus nodded, not entirely understanding but out of options. Lyra stepped forward and placed her hands on either side of his face. Her skin felt like silk against his rough cheeks. The blue light from her body intensified, flowing over her arms toward her fingertips. "Open your mind to me," she whispered. Marcus felt a strange sensation, like a cool stream flowing into his consciousness. Suddenly, he could feel the ship around them, as if it were an extension of his body. He sensed the approaching vessels, the inhibitor field, and most surprisingly, Lyra's presence within his mind. Her thoughts brushed against his. Asterisked together. "Follow my lead." Asterisk. The bounty hunter's communication crackled through the ship's speakers. "Surrender the Asteri, and you'll live, Jones." Marcus felt Lyra guide his hands to the controls. Energy he didn't know his ship possessed hummed through the hull. "Now," she said aloud, her voice resonating strangely. Marcus pressed the controls, feeling power surge through the ship. A pulse of energy expanded outward, disrupting the inhibitor field. Simultaneously, the ship's engines roared to life with twice their normal power. The Wanderer shot forward, breaking free from the trap. The bounty hunters opened fire, but their shots seemed to bend around the ship's hull. "How are you doing this?" Marcus gasped as they accelerated toward open space. "Not me," Lyra replied, her silver eyes glowing with intensity. Asterisk is asterisk. Your human intuition guides my Asteri energy." As the stars blurred into the familiar blue tunnel of hyperspace, Marcus felt the connection between them fade. Lyra removed her hands from his face, but something remained, a thread of awareness linking them. That was, Marcus struggled for words. The beginning. Lyra said simply. "A true bond, beyond duty. Among my people, such connections are rare and precious." For the first time since her rescue, Marcus truly looked at Lyra not as someone he had saved, but as someone who had just saved him. The Wanderer emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Ceres Nebula, a swirling mass of purple and gold dust clouds that concealed whatever lay within. According to the coordinates Lyra had provided, this remote region might harbor the last free colony of her people. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, eyeing the sensor readings. "The nebula will blind our scanners and damage the engines if we stay too long." Lyra stood at the viewport, her hand pressed against the transparent material. The patterns of light beneath her skin seemed to respond to the nebula, pulsing in harmony with the distant cosmic clouds. "They are here," she said with quiet certainty. "I can feel them." In the months since their minds had briefly connected during the bounty hunter attack, Marcus had stopped questioning Lyra's intuition. Their relationship had transformed into something neither of them fully understood. Not quite friendship, not quite partnership, but a bond that transcended both. "Then we go in," Marcus decided, adjusting the ship's shields. But slowly, the Wanderer crept forward into the nebula's outer layers. Static immediately filled the communication channels, and the navigation system flickered uncertainly. "Maintain minimum life support and divert power to shields," Marcus ordered. 2 hours later, after navigating through increasingly dense clouds of stellar dust, the sensors detected a small planetoid hidden deep within the nebula. "There," Lyra whispered, her silver eyes wide. "That's where they are." As they approached, the planetoid revealed itself as a hostile-looking moon orbiting a dead gas giant. Its surface appeared barren and crater-marked, with no signs of habitation. "Are you sure?" Marcus frowned at the readings. "The atmosphere is barely breathable. And the temperature. Appearances deceive." Lyra interrupted. "Watch." She placed her palm on the ship's communication panel. Blue light flowed from her fingers into the system, and a series of pulses emanated from the ship, not radio waves or standard signals, but patterns of energy Marcus had never seen before. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, without warning, a section of the moon's surface shimmered and disappeared, revealing a hidden landing pad. "An illusion field," Marcus breathed. "Impressive." Lyra smiled, though tension lined her face. "Let us hope they still recognize the ancient greeting." The Wanderer descended toward the revealed landing pad. As they touched down, Marcus spotted figures emerging from concealed entrances in the surrounding rock face. They glowed with the same blue luminescence as Lyra, though many appeared dimmer, as if their light was fading. "Stay behind me," Lyra said as they approached the airlock. "They will be cautious of outsiders." When the door opened, a dozen Asteri stood waiting, their hands raised in what Marcus recognized as defensive postures. An older male with elaborate light patterns across his chest stepped forward. "You bring the human to our sanctuary," he said in a melodious language that Marcus somehow understood. Another gift from his mental connection with Lyra. "This human freed me from captivity on Nexus," Lyra replied, bowing deeply. "Elder Torm, he has earned the right of sanctuary." The elder studied Marcus with silver eyes that seemed to peer into his soul. "Many humans have claimed to be allies, only to betray us to the collectors. I'm not interested in collecting or selling anyone," Marcus said firmly. "I came because Lyra wanted to find her people. Nothing more." Murmurs spread through the gathered Asteri. The elder approached closer, raising his hand toward Marcus's face without touching him. "Your mind carries the echo of our kind," he said with surprise. "You have shared consciousness with Lyra." "Only briefly," Marcus admitted. "During an attack." The elder turned to Lyra with a questioning expression. She nodded once, her luminescence brightening. "Very few non-Asteri can survive such a connection," he said, lowering his hand. "Interesting." A younger Asteri pushed through the crowd. "Elder, we cannot trust any human. The markets hunt us because of them." "No," Lyra countered. They hunt us because of what we know. Marcus risked everything to free me and the others at the auction. He has fought alongside me when he could have abandoned me." The elder raised his hand for silence. "We will judge him by our ways." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, 3 Asteri stepped forward and surrounded him, their hands extended toward his head without touching him. He felt a gentle pressure against his mind, different from Lyra's presence, more formal, impersonal. "Do not resist," Lyra whispered. "They only seek truth." Marcus closed his eyes and allowed the strange mental touch. Memories flashed through his mind. The auction, the escape, the weeks aboard the Wanderer, the growing connection he felt with Lyra. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, the Asteri withdrew. The elder nodded slowly. "Marcus Jones speaks truth," he announced. "He and Lyra are welcome among us." As the gathered Asteri dispersed, the elder gestured for them to follow him deeper into the hidden colony. "Come," he said gravely. "There is much you should know about why our people are being hunted, and why your rescue of Lyra may have greater consequences than you imagined." The hidden Asteri colony hummed with quiet activity as Marcus helped reinforce the defensive perimeter. 7 days had passed since their arrival, and each one revealed more about the dire situation facing Lyra's people. "The shield generator needs realignment," Marcus said, adjusting a panel on the ancient device. Only 27 Asteri remained alive in this colony, the last free members of their species, as far as anyone knew. Nearby, Lyra worked with 4 other Asteri, their hands weaving complex patterns of light as they attempted to reactivate technology that had lain dormant for centuries. The mental link between Marcus and Lyra had strengthened, allowing him occasional glimpses of her thoughts. Concern, determination, and something deeper she kept carefully guarded. Elder Torm approached, his luminescence noticeably dimmer than when they had arrived. "The inner chambers are secured. What of our outer defenses?" "They won't stop a dedicated attack," Marcus admitted, "but they'll buy us time." The elder nodded gravely. "Time may be all we require. Lyra's knowledge of the ancient weapons system is our greatest hope." A young Asteri scout rushed into the chamber. "Ships approaching." They'd found the nebula passage. Marcus's hand moved to his blaster. "How many?" 3 large vessels, military class." Lyra joined them, her silver eyes meeting Marcus's. "Director Rask," she said, "the market owner himself." Marcus had learned about Rask during their time in the colony, a powerful figure who had made his fortune selling rare specimens to collectors across the galaxy. The Asteri were his most valuable commodity, prized for their genetic memory and connection to ancient technologies. "How did he find us?" Marcus demanded. Elder Torm's expression darkened. "There is only one way. A tracker." All eyes turned to Marcus. He shook his head firmly. "I removed the tracker from the Wanderer before we arrived." "Not on your ship," the elder said. "On you." Marcus felt a chill run through him. "What?" Lyra stepped forward, placing her hand on his shoulder. Light flowed from her fingers, spreading across his body in a scanning pattern. It concentrated at the base of his neck, illuminating something beneath his skin. "There," she said quietly. "A bio-tracker. Microscopic. It must have been injected during the chaos at the market." Marcus cursed. "I led them straight here." "No time for blame," Elder Torm interrupted. "We must prepare." The colony erupted into coordinated activity. Children and elders retreated to the innermost chambers, while those with fighting ability took defensive positions. Marcus joined Lyra in the central chamber, where 5 Asteri worked frantically to activate a massive crystalline structure. "What is this?" Marcus asked. "Our last defense," Lyra explained, her hands dancing across the crystal surface. "A weapon designed to disrupt technology without harming living tissue. But it requires tremendous energy to power." A distant explosion shook the colony. The perimeter defenses had engaged. "They're here," a scout reported through the communication system. Marcus drew his blaster. "How much time do you need?" At least 10 minutes to fully charge the crystal, Lyra replied. I'll buy you that time. He turned to leave, but Lyra caught his arm. Marcus, Rask doesn't want the colony. He wants me. And now, possibly you as well. Our mental connection makes you valuable to him. Their eyes met, and through their bond, Marcus felt her fear, not for herself, but for him. Stay alive, he said simply, then rushed toward the outer chambers. The battle was already intense when Marcus reached the main entrance. Rask's forces, a mixture of mercenaries and combat droids, poured through breaches in the outer defenses. The Asteri fought bravely, using their mental abilities to confuse enemies and create defensive barriers, but they were outnumbered. Marcus took position behind a fallen column and began picking off attackers with precise shots. His military training returned fully, and for several minutes, he helped hold the line. Then he saw him. Director Rask himself, a tall human with cybernetic enhancements visible along his jawline and hands. He moved with unnatural speed, flanked by 4 heavily armed guards. Find the female scientist, Rask ordered, and the human who helped her escape. Marcus aimed at Rask, but before he could fire, an explosion threw him backward. Pain shot through his side as debris struck him. Through blurred vision, he saw Rask's forces advance deeper into the colony. Struggling to his feet, Marcus staggered after them. He couldn't let them reach Lyra before the weapon was ready. He arrived at the central chamber just as Rask's men were breaking through the final barrier. The crystal pulsed with building energy, not yet at full power. Lyra and the other Asteri worked frantically, their luminescence flaring with effort. Stop them, Rask shouted as he entered behind his guards. Marcus fired, taking down one guard before another shot struck his shoulder. He collapsed against the wall, his blaster skittering across the floor. Rask approached him, smiling coldly. The hero who cost me millions in merchandise. Finally, we meet. Behind Rask, Marcus could see Lyra looking at him, her silver eyes wide with anguish. The crystal needed just a few more moments. You're too late, Marcus said, blood trickling from his mouth. They've already called for help. Rask laughed. No one knows this colony exists, and no one will miss it when it's gone. He gestured to his men. Take him. He's more valuable alive now that he's bonded with an Asteri. As guards hauled Marcus to his feet, he caught Lyra's eye one last time, and nodded slightly. Through their bond, he sent a single thought. Asterisk, finish it. I'll survive, asterisk. The last thing Marcus saw before being dragged away was Lyra's hand pressing against the crystal, her light flowing into it with renewed determination. The holding cell aboard Rask's flagship was cold and sterile. Marcus sat on the metal bench, his wounded shoulder roughly bandaged. 3 days had passed since his capture. Through the small viewport, he could see the nebula where the Asteri colony remained hidden. Whether safe or destroyed, he didn't know. The cell door slid open. Director Rask entered, flanked by 2 guards. Your Asteri friends have gone silent, Rask said, studying Marcus with calculating eyes. But my scanners detect energy fluctuations in the moon's core. They're still alive, aren't they? Marcus remained silent, focusing on the faint connection he still felt with Lyra. Distance had weakened their bond, but he could sense her presence. Determined, focused, alive. It doesn't matter, Rask continued. My scientists are more interested in you now, the first human to successfully bond with an Asteri mind. He leaned closer. The secret you carry could be worth more than the entire colony. They're not secrets to be sold, Marcus said, his voice rough from disuse. Rask smiled coldly. Everything has a price. A distant explosion rocked the ship, throwing Rask against the wall. Alarms blared throughout the vessel. What was that? Rask demanded into his communicator. Unknown energy signature approaching. A panicked voice replied. Our weapons systems are failing. Marcus smiled despite his pain. He felt Lyra's presence growing stronger. You should have killed me when you had the chance. The ship shuddered again. The lights flickered and died, leaving only emergency red illumination. The cell door mechanism sparked and failed. Through the viewport, Marcus saw it, a pulse of blue light approaching the ship, rippling through space like a wave. Inside the energy field, smaller objects moved with purpose. Asteri ships, Rask whispered, his confidence faltering for the first time. The flagship's artificial gravity fluctuated as systems throughout the vessel began to fail. Marcus used the moment of chaos to lunge forward, tackling one guard while Rask and the other stumbled to regain balance. Grabbing the fallen guard's weapon, Marcus fired at the second guard, then turned the weapon toward Rask. "This ends now," Marcus said. Rask's cybernetic hand transformed into a blade. "I built this empire. I won't lose it to sentimentality over a dying species." They clashed in the confined space of the cell, Rask's enhanced strength nearly overwhelming Marcus in his wounded state. The blade sliced Marcus's arm, but he managed to land a solid blow to Rask's jaw. As they fought, the ship rocked with multiple impacts. Through the viewport, Marcus glimpsed Asteri vessels attaching to the hull, boarding parties. Rask knocked the weapon from Marcus's hand and pinned him against the wall, cybernetic blade pressing against his throat. "If I die, you die," Rask hissed. The cell wall behind Rask suddenly glowed blue, then melted away. Lyra stood in the opening, her luminescence blazing brighter than Marcus had ever seen. Behind her, other Asteri moved through the ship's corridors, disabling systems and subduing crew members. Rask spun to face the new threat, but Lyra was faster. She raised her hand, and pure energy shot forward, striking Rask's cybernetic enhancements. His augmentation sputtered and failed, leaving him suddenly clumsy and vulnerable. "This is impossible," Rask gasped. The weapon wasn't ready. "We finished it," Lyra said, stepping forward. "After you took Marcus, there was no choice." Two Asteri guards secured Rask while Lyra rushed to Marcus, her cool hands gently touching his wounds. Light flowed from her fingertips, easing his pain. "I knew you'd come," Marcus said, smiling weakly. "My devotion is not merely from debt," she replied, her silver eyes meeting his. "It is from choice." Within hours, Rask's entire operation lay in ruins. The Asteri weapon had disabled his fleet, and the evidence found aboard his flagship was transmitted to the Galactic Council, proof of his crimes against sentient beings that even his wealth and connections couldn't overcome. On the bridge of the captured flagship, Marcus stood beside Lyra as she addressed the Council via emergency channel. "The Asteri people request protection under galactic law," she stated, "and justice for those who hunted us." The Council representatives looked stunned at the appearance of a species long thought extinct. They unanimously granted protected status and dispatched peacekeeping forces to the nebula. Later, as Marcus and Lyra stood on the observation deck, watching Rask being transferred to a Council prison ship, she turned to him. "The life debt between us is fulfilled," she said formally. "You are free of any obligation to my people." Marcus took her hand, feeling the familiar current of energy between them. "And if I don't want to be free?" Lyra's luminescence brightened. "Then what do you want, Marcus Jones?" "A partner," he said simply. "Someone who chooses to stand beside me, as I choose to stand beside her. Not from debt or duty, but from something stronger." Lyra's free hand rose to touch his face. Through their bond, he felt her joy, clear as starlight. "Among my people," she said softly, "such a bond has a name. Once formed, it cannot be broken, even by death." "I can live with that," Marcus replied, drawing her closer. As their lips met, the patterns of light beneath Lyra's skin reached out toward Marcus, and for the first time, faint echoes of blue luminescence appeared beneath his own skin. Two beings from different worlds, now forever connected by something deeper than devotion and stronger than duty. Love, the universal constant that needed no translation.